Hey all, boardgamerants here, where you'll find everything solo tabletop gaming and more. A little bit of a different game today, a war game. Labyrinth, The War on Terror. Older game. Let's see what it's about. And then I'm going to let you know what I'm thinking about it from a solo perspective, of course. Labyrinth, The War on Terror. So, that was kind of a sing-songy, for such a serious game here. You got yourself a war game, card-driven war. If you ever played Twilight Struggle, then this game makes sense very quickly for you. It has many of the same mechanics, but there's also, I would say, it's more involved because in Twilight Struggle, it's basically just influence going up and down, up and down. Here you've got alignments that are going to go, this way and that way. And then you've got governance levels that are going to go from good to fair to poor to Islamist rule. So this is what's the game about. Essentially, it's the global war on terror. After the Twin Towers fell in the United States, 2001, then it's the U.S. against basically Islamist rule. And the jihadists are out there with their cells. These are the, your opponent. These are troops. This is U.S. troops. You've got a board that starts a certain way, and there's other ways to play it, but this is very basically the main way that you play the game. You've got some cells, terrorist cells here in Afghanistan, and you've got some troops represented in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia, and you've got alliances, basically ally. This is a poorly governed ally, Saudi Arabia, and over here you've got Islamist rule adversary in Afghanistan, and the U.S. is trying to get countries basically have Muslim countries, because there's Muslim countries out here, and then there's non-Muslim, Europe over here, and here you can see I got these little things still out here. Take those off, but out here you're going to be dealing with postures and countries are going to be like hard, aggressive stance against the war on terror, and then soft, more of a, come on, let's take it easy here, more of a diplomatic, I guess, rather than sending military, etc. So the U.S. is going to do a lot better and make it a lot easier for them to affect their influence if they are, matching up in stance with the rest of the world. If the world's in a hard posture and the U.S. is in a hard posture, then all right, we're in sync. It's going to be easier to affect change out here. Whereas if the world kind of goes soft and the U.S. remains hard, or vice versa, then that makes it harder to affect change. So this is part of the game, is trying to make sure that postures are aligned, and that's going to be basically affecting the non-Muslim countries. So again, Europe over here, but over here you also got China, India, Thailand, Indonesia. Down here you got Kenya. And then any place, the Muslim countries are all about alignment and about governance level. And so that's why they've got these little 3 boxes here. And then depending on, until you kind of go out there and bring them into the game, you don't really, they're nothing. They don't start with anything except for, again, Syria, Libya, they start off with certain things according to, probably factually based, I would guess. But the whole goal of the game is, in the solo, you are trying to get your good resources up to 6. And if you're just playing through the deck once, and if you're playing through the deck 2 times, you want to get your good resources up to here. 3 times through the deck solo, you have to have your good resources up here. What does that even mean? Well, that means like the Gulf states here has 3 resources available if you can change its governance over here to good. So if I can get this all the way over to ally and in good, I get credit for those 3 resources. I would move this over. If that ever changes, then I lose those resources. If it ever goes, like, say, for instance, back to fair, it's got to be in good for me to get credit for it. So Saudi Arabia, I want to work my way from poor to fair to good in order to get credit for the 3. So basically, if I can get the governance level of the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia to good, I get credit for 6 resources. And if I can hold on to that by the end of the game, or at least by the time we've gone through this deck once, I win the game. But you're going to be going up against Islamist resources. That's how you lose the game, is if this ever reaches 6. And that's if it ever does. As soon as it reaches 6, if you're just playing through one deck, you lose. Or I think it might be if it ever, even if you're playing 2 or 3, I'm not sure. I've only played it one deck, because that's a long game as it is. But they start off with 1 because they over here have Islamist rule in Afghanistan. They get credit for that 1 resource. So that's how you basically win the game, is you're trying to shift alliances to ally, and then increase their governance to good, and to win. And you want to keep jihadists from getting Islamist rule in too many countries to where it totals 6, because then in that event you lose. So that's the ebb and flow of the game, I guess. You're going to be having, this is my hand of cards here, and then over here you've got the, well, hand of cards for the AI. This is just a deck. You'll be flipping it over and activating each card, one by one. The rounds go that jihadist action phase, they play, 1 card, and then they play another card. Then I get to play a card and another card. And then if there's any plots are always, bad for the U.S. Then this goes back over here, and you do it again and again and again until you effectively run out of cards. Then a couple things happen. You're going to re-deal and then go again and again and again until you work your way through that deck. So while you're doing this, to effect change out here, a lot of times you're going to be moving your troops around. You want to be taking out these cells. There's sleeper cells, and then they become active once they try to do something naughty. And then you got them. If you do the right thing, you disrupt them. You can take these cells and remove them off. They're either going to be you're either going to have troops on the board or over in this section over here. There's 3 sections where the troops go from here to here and then back from here to here. When you take them off here, you take them from left to right, and you put them out in the world. And when you put them back, you're going to put them back from right to left. Because depending on if it's low intensity or war, as soon as you start getting these guys out here and put out on the board, well, then you're going to be drawing fewer cards each round and stuff, because you eventually get into overstretch, where you're just stretched too far out, too thin, and become less effective. So you got to kind of balance that. And jihadist funding kind of works the same way, in that as cells, depending on where their funding marker is, between 1 and 3 or 4 and 6 or 7 and 9, they'll have access to fund cells to go out and do their thing out in the world. And as this moves down, it's bad for the jihadist funding, because then it's just tougher for them to get their cells out, because they can basically only take cells out from the box that this little thing is. So if it's up at least to 7, they can take all their cells out. But once it gets to the 6, now these guys, if they're a little harder to access once this funding goes down. So that's going to be kind of going up and down based on movement and putting cells or troops out on the board, and depending on your card play. So very generally, the card play, much like Twilight Struggle, you're going to have an ops value here, or you can use the card for its event. And depending on if the US, like if I play this card and I want to use its ops value, then I have to trigger its event, which is bad for me. This is based on its color there. Like here, this is a US event. So if I play this, and I can play it for either or, and either its ops value or its event. But if I play this, then I have to, I don't want the event to happen, but if I choose to play it, then I have to trigger the event as well. So, and the ops value, so this has to do with, so a little asymmetrical here in this sense, and to change the values of countries to be able to affect them. As I was mentioning, I have to find a card that at least has, matches the governance level. So if I'm dealing with a poor country, I have to use a card that has a value at least as high as its governance level. So it's easier for me to affect the Gulf states, because it only needs a 2 or less. So, I can, these 3s I'd have to use to affect Saudi Arabia. So it's basically the price of entry to affect a country. However, in the jihadists, it's a little different. These numbers up here have more to do with how many dice they get to roll. So when the U.S. does its rolls to affect certain change out here, and they roll. They've only got one die basically they're ever going to roll. They've just got to pay the price of entry, like I described. Whereas jihadists, they can basically affect, you know, all over the place, and well, there's all sorts of rules, but the number instead has to do with how many dice they get to roll. So that's why they have 3 dice over here for them, because, you know, they're going to get anywhere from basically 1 to 3 dice to have to roll on their turn. So it's asymmetrical in that sense, that the numbers mean different things for the depending on who you're playing. So you're always going to play the US as the player, and the AI is going to be controlled by this sheet right here, which is pretty daunting to look at. You know, jihadist activities, playing 1 player, and, you know, it gives you the victory conditions, and then just all the, first you have to figure out, when you flip over a card, you're going to run through this track up here to figure out what it's going to do with that card. And then once you know what it's going to do with that card, then you have to go down here based on its different actions of plot, major jihad, minor jihad, recruit, travel. You have to go through its, you know, scheme of things left to right, and just, you know, match it up with what's happening on the map, and then that'll tell you what to do with that card. So that takes some doing. Sometimes there's going to be some random country decisions, and so you'll use this little table for that. And you've got a chart here that goes over the stuff for the jihadist player, the AI, and then over here, US has its own US operations, and what it does. It also has a little thing in here, but you'll notice it is the same as what we saw over here. Inside is basically just all the AI activities, and the AI is always the jihadist activities. So that's about it. You know, there's prestige here. This modifier goes up and down with certain effects. You know, it changes your roll. When you're rolling the dice to try and affect change out there, you're trying to roll high, basically, and this will affect, you know, the more prestigious the U.S. is in the eyes of the world, they're going to get +1 modifiers to their rolls, and, you know, the lower the prestige you get, it starts getting in bad territory, harder to affect change out there. And when the jihadists are rolling, though, they're effectively trying to roll low. They're trying to roll below the governance. You know, they want to get, like, if they want to affect something here in the Gulf states, they got to roll 2 or lower to do their naughty, you know, to do the stuff that they're trying to accomplish. So U.S. is trying to roll high, jihadists is trying to roll low. But that's a very general overall idea of what the game's about. And let's talk about how it plays solo. First off, I want to preface this. I am not a war gamer. I couldn't even honestly tell you, is this a coin game? Is this I always have to stop and think what that stands for. Covert insurgency? No. Counterinsurgency. CO, counter, IN, insurgency. I think that's right. Anyway, this is not my forte. I'm a Euro gamer. I'm a civilization gamer. RPG, fantasy role-playing gamer. Solo gamer. This game is it's a war game, and I don't play a lot of war games. I've played some, you know. I was just trying to I was like, Scythe. That's not a war game, but Root, don't laugh. That's a war game. A cutesy little animals in the forest war game, but definitely a war game. Very asymmetrical, similar. You know, this has got some asymmetricalness to it. Does Labyrinth. I played Twilight Struggle, in fact, and it doesn't have an official solo variant, but I believe, gosh, in BGG, I believe it's still the #1 rated war game on BGG. And, you know, it's how old? 15 years old? So, anyway, so please understand that that's where, you know, I played a lot of games in my, you know, over 20 years of gaming, but war games is not my thing. But I'm, you know, open-minded to all games, and this game, of course, was one of the few 10 years ago when it came out, and that's when I picked it up, that had an official solo variant. And that's why I got it. I mean, I didn't care if it didn't seem all that appealing. I still wanted to play something solo, and there weren't a lot of options back then. There was like Agricola, and there was, you know, some other things, but, you know, Mage Knight hadn't even come out yet. So I picked up this game 10 years ago, and I tried to learn how to play it, and I gave up. You know, I didn't even finish the first game. It didn't nothing. I just couldn't get into it, and it just seemed I was just trying to figure out what was going on, and there was all these examples of play, and I don't know, maybe I was a little less patient back then, I'm not sure, but I was like, I put it away, I'll get to it. 10 years later, I did, and there's some people that had recommended it, and I brought it up in the past, recent past, and people were like, you got to try that game, and so I did. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to bust this out, I'm going to figure it out, and it's probably going to be easier for me to learn now, right? Because I just have so much experience, much more in gaming, and whatever. I don't think it was. I don't think it was any easier to learn. Anyway, but I slogged through it, and I learned the game, and I played it 5 times. I always give a game at least 5 plays, because there's been games that have got me, like Teotihuacan. I didn't like the first 4 or 5 games, but after that, 4th or 5th game, something was flipping, something was switching, and I could feel it. And then, and now I've got tons of plays of that game, and it's one of my favorite games. I mean, it's not a war game or anything, but the idea is that, I feel like you got to give a game a chance. And I feel like playing a game 5 times, and that's not even including the playing through, a bit of the 2-player, well, all of the 2-player example, and then the solo example. It's not even including that. But to learn this game, I did all those things. And then I played it 5 times. And of those 5 times, I beat it once. It does have some difficulty levels. I ramped it up as soon as I beat it the first time. And it teaches you the game from an introductory level. And it says, ramp this up as soon as you got the mechanics down. So once I had that down, I ramped it up. And then I didn't win any more games. But so that all said, from the beginning, the setup is pretty darn straightforward. You get that board up and you get up and running, out of the box. It's about 10 minutes. I mean, if you've got all your pieces set up in little bags, you can set that up pretty darn quick. And then between games, like from game to game, once it's set up, like 5 minute-ish. It's pretty quick. I'm surprised, but you just got the one deck. You don't have to sort it out or anything. And you just, I mean, it's a pretty quick setup, which I kind of found surprising as involved as this game is. That says something. I don't know. I appreciated that. The table space, you're going to take up a whole, coffee table, 3x3, mostly the board, but you're also going to have, got to put your card somewhere, and you're going to want to have those little player aid sheets handy. Put those somewhere. The length of play is long. I mean, it's too long for my liking. Even just, you can play it through the deck once, twice, or 3 times. Oh my gosh. I've never tried it 2 or 3 times. Only 1 time. And even by the 5th game, I was still in it 2 hours for the game. And that could just be my own, I'm just not getting it as fast as other people who are really maybe into this type of game would, or have had a lot of experience in this type of gaming would. But it was still taking me 2 hours to play through 1 deck. I can't imagine playing through a 2nd and 3rd deck. Granted, when you're playing through, you play your cards, certain cards you remove from the game for the rest of the game, and then so the next deck you'd have fewer cards, but not that many fewer, I don't think. Anyway, that would be a tremendously long game if you wanted to. You could ramp her right on up. I think on the box it says it's a 3-hour game, but play through it 1 deck solo, you can get it down to about 2 hours, or at least that's where I was at. The component quality is good. I remember this being it was kind of an expensive game back then. It's like $60 or something. I remember, I remember Agricola back then being like, oh my God, it was like $70. That was so expensive for games back then. Yeah, that was back then. Those were the good old days. Anyway, so, but the components are good. There's some good wooden components there. I like the cool green insignias on the cells. They're flashy looking. A little fiddly when you're playing the game, because it's like when they're sleeping, you got to flip them upside down. When they become active, you got to flip them right side up. And sometimes you got to set up, like, you got to flip 8 of them active, and it's just like, there's these little tiny pieces. Anyway, component quality was perfectly fine, and very much standard for what I'd expect for kind of a $60 game. And thematically, it's historically based, so I think the theme really comes out in the gameplay. Now, if you've ever played, again, Twilight Struggle, this game is and I played Twilight Struggle. This game is it borrows heavily from its mechanics, and then adds to it considerably. So probably, to just because Well, I don't know why exactly, but to make it its own game, and the designer, I'm sure, had just a different vision. But it's got a lot more stuff to consider than in well, maybe not to consider, but a lot more game mechanics to try to wrap your head around than in Twilight Struggle. But that was probably just to help bring out the theme more, and I think it did a good job of that. The rulebook, for a GMT rulebook, I was not a fan of this one. And I played, there's been a number of GMT games that I've played now. Space Empires 4X. There's another space game that I can't seem to think of right now, but anyway, I've played a number of GMT games, and the rule books are usually pretty darn good. I was not a fan of this one. I found myself having to go back and look, and just stuff wasn't like intuitively where I kind of expected it to be. There was kind of all over the place, and so I found it difficult to learn this game. Even going through the 2-player example and then the solo example, I just found it hard to wrap my head around. And then thankfully there was some people that threw up some videos on it, so I was able to look at those. But difficult to learn. And the rule book was, there's a rule book and there's kind of the example book, and both, I don't know. Didn't like the rule book on this one with GMT. This one, the mechanics were pretty solid, and I felt like there was just a lot of them to keep track of, and it was asymmetrical, whereas the way the AI played versus the way you played, and you kind of had to route. You played, the value of cards allowed you to play in a certain area, and then just to roll one die, whereas the AI had to have the number was all about how many dice it was going to roll. On the US side, it was about rolling high, and on the AI side, it was about rolling low. And so there was a lot of mechanics to bring out the strategy, I think, but it all kind of just bogged down the game, I think, especially because when you're trying to run the AI on this, it is much. You saw that diagram that I laid out, and I felt like, I just keep playing. You'll get it. And I did to a certain extent, but that was the biggest thing that I didn't enjoy about this game. I didn't mind the game, but it says something when I say that I got to 5 games and I stopped. It's like kind of forced myself to get to that 5-game mark just so I could really feel more, have a better opinion of it from a more practiced standpoint, rather than just, because really, I want to say by the second or third game, I could tell that I felt like I just wasn't really going to care for this game. But I powered through, I got the 5 plays in, and it never sped up. The AI, running the AI always just took so much time, and it just, the going through that little diagram, I feel like I got the top part of the diagram down pretty well. By the 5th game, and maybe if I played it another 6th and the 7th, 8th, 9th time, it would have gotten a little bit better. But it was just such a slog trying to go through the AI's turn, because when you play your turn, it's fast. You kind of know what you want to do. I kind of, and you play through it, it's like, boop, bam, you roll the dice, and bloop, right? Sometimes you would. And then it was the AI turn. You'd play your turn in like a minute, and then it would take 5 minutes to do the AI's turn. And it was over and over again. So now I got 2 minutes of my time, 10 minutes of just trying to figure out what the AI is doing. And certain things like the travel was just so, sometimes you put all the cells in one, like when you're recruiting in an area, you put all the cells in if it qualifies, but the travel was like one at a time in one different area, and then once you figured out like where the 3 different cells are going to go in 3 different spots, now you have to figure out where those cells are coming from, each one individually, and it's just like, it would take forever. And so I really didn't like that about the game. I think I would have had a much more favorable view of this game 10 years ago. When if I did a review on it 10 years ago, when the pickings was slim from the solo standpoint, I would have given. It was very playable, and I think it does very smart from an AI standpoint, and it would have been better than nothing. But now, compared to games, now games come out and they darn well better have a solo option, or the community is going to get mad. So solo tabletop gaming has become a thing now. Back then, it wasn't, and so back then I just would have appreciated it more. But now games are doing, there's better designs that make a smart AI that you can wrap your head around and play pretty quickly, so you can get back to what you get to do, and you can go back and forth. I mean, I would say the best solo games out there now, you play the AI faster than your turn. And in your turn, you get to enjoy and spend most of your time in gameplay playing your turn. This was the opposite. You played your turn real quick, and you spent the rest of your time trying to figure out what the AI was going to do. And that's what really took the game, down notches for me. Didn't mind the game. I liked Twilight Struggle. I play that, on my phone, and it's good. But this, that design, Twilight Struggle, is just, it's just a masterful design. It's, I think it's #1 for a reason, and has stuck that landing for so long, because it's just, it's just a beautifully designed game. And this game borrows from that, but then it adds a bunch of stuff to it that makes it kind of clunky. And running the AI, now you can pick this up, I think, on Steam now. So you can get Labyrinth on Steam, and that might be probably the best way to play it. It's 12 or 13 bucks, I think, on Steam, where it runs the AI for you. Bam, that would be the way to go. Then you don't get to move all the bits and stuff, but just to enjoy the game, I think that's the way someone would really need to go, to where they don't just have to sit and spend so much time, because that's, the 2 hours of gameplay, then what do you got? You're playing the game, your turn, for like 20-25 minutes, and the hour and a half is to figure out what the AI is going to do, or whatever. It's just very lopsided. So, comes with difficulty levels, which is great, because you play the game the way it's taught to you, just introductory level, and I beat it, like I think it was the third game that I played, I won, and then I ramped up the difficulty, and I didn't win after that. But that's fine. I mean, that's what I prefer. So it does have difficulty levels, which is great. Always appreciated in a solo game. Replayability, I would think if this is your kind of game, you go through that, there's a big stack of cards, and they're going to come out differently every game, and it's going to really change things up. And you've got the dice rolling, so you got a good strategy, because you're rolling the dice so much, and there are die roll modifiers to the game, and you're rolling the dice so much that, when you get those bad rolls, the dice hate me thing, you're doing so many rolls that it all mitigates itself. And so I think there's a good level of strategy there to be enjoyed with this game. However, again, it's just, it was because that one factor, just trying to run the AI, took me out of the game. And so I wasn't able to enjoy it like I think I might have otherwise. But that is Labyrinth, The War on Terror. Please let me know if you have any questions or thoughts down below. And until next time, I appreciate you watching. I'm boardgamerants, and I'm out.